Okay, aboard for another year of fun, excitement, thrills and spill. Welcome to 2019, first meeting of the year for us. Thanks for finding a way here. Still toying out the venues, but hopefully this will work out for us, and it's, the food's nice anyway. So, without much ado, my name is Peter. I'm the president of the Space Association, and I'll just run a TV commercial. Few hits and memories there. We've done quite a few things over the years in the group, and it's actually been out of date that video, but yeah, we've had a bit of fun. So let's get on with tonight's meeting. A few interesting things that have been happening this year, and we're going to touch on them a little bit later in our space news. But I just want to run through the program as we speak tonight. We're going to be just giving a bit of an overview of what's happening in the association, some of the events that we've got planned and things that might be coming up. Then we're going to feature looking back at Apollo 11 50 years ago. And then we're going to have a little bit of a break, have a chat with somebody you haven't met before, or go and have a drink, go and do something else, have a cigarette at the time if you want, that's your passion. And then we're going to have some space news at 8:30 with Michael and Angelo. And then we're going to have time for all the news that's going on, and then we've got Rennie with his Planetary and science update, so that's always awesome. And then we finish up here at 10 o'clock and roll out in the street and see what happens for the rest of the evening. I'm not going to get into that. So just a couple of things that are coming up. I don't have much details on these, but we'll be bringing them forward to you later on. We haven't been involved with this. Obviously the air show is on in February, and there's a space industry conference happening in conjunction with that. Once again, at this stage we're not involved, but if anyone is, or there might be some opportunity, I'm not sure. So we'll keep you informed of that, just keep you on your email, etc. There's also this thing that popped up in my feeds. I don't know. It's the Moon Village Association. Sounds a bit dubious, but I don't know. So it's a Beacon Theatre in Federation Square, and so they're doing this to mark the 50th anniversary, and they're going to have some speakers on the environment, mining, medical, space industry. So 2nd of March. So there's a website. Have a look at it. No guarantees. I don't know anything about it, but I thought people might be interested.
I think it's a Saturday morning.
Right. March 2nd. This ancient and celestial cultural body deserves our deepest attention. Okay?
It's a bit
Arts and politicians.
Alright, so as we have mentioned continuously, 50 years this year is Apollo 11, and of course that coincides with July 16 to 25 in Australia. So we at the association are working on a few different channels. There is a what's called the Moon Festival at the Sun Theatre in Yarraville, and they're running a series of movies over the week. That list was kind of published in draft about 6 months ago. We've since been in touch with them because Michael has been in touch with various producers and people who've been putting together some pretty incredible films that are coming out in conjunction with Apollo 11. And so we're talking to them about A, having them screen that as part of their festival, or B, and it will be perhaps the association having their own screening event. So we'll keep you up to date on that. I've also approached the ABC to maybe, and actually it's Andrew Rennie's idea, whoever he is, about running a series of space-themed songs and videos. And he's proposed members to be the hosts, you know, we some red couch, I'll call it that. Anyway. We also had this idea that, you know how SBS had these slow TV where they do the GAN, whole 11 footage, the whole moonwalk, why not, real time? And once again, perhaps an essay being hosted, movie screening or something of that sort. So we'll keep you informed of all of that as it progresses. And one of the ideas we did have was maybe having a logo for the association for this year, just to mark it. So I've been knocking around a couple of designs in conjunction with Mike and come up with this, obviously with the footprint and just merged with our logo. So it is a draft thing that knocked up a little while ago. But the idea was to perhaps have it as a promotional thing for the Apollo 11 event and for the association. Mike's been looking at the system, our system to host our website and our email server actually has a link with a shop. You can actually go ahead and, let's say you want to order a t-shirt with that logo on it, you could go into the system, place an order, produce it and send it to you. Sort of thing, coffee cups, t-shirts, I don't know. Whether it turns into anything, whether people will be interested, I don't know. But it's just an idea. So, yeah, the idea would increase awareness of Apollo 11. Could be collectible item, you know, it's might be collectors next few years' time. And, you know, whether or not we have it as a temporary branding thing for the association, just in the lead up to July. Just a bit of fun as well, which is always important. So, I don't want people to forget that, maybe we can talk about it during the break. Further afield in Canberra, there is a group of people that used to work at Abdilla and Concrete and Parks have kind of formed an association. They've been together for quite a while. They organised a 40th anniversary event, and there were other 30 events before that. I was involved at that stage to mark the Apollo 11. They said they swore black and blue, 10 years ago that it was going to last all be too old, can't do it anymore, and they've settled up again and they're doing this one. So they're looking at trying to get a monument in Canberra built. This is a mock-up that someone's knocked up there, which apparently they've got a little bit of funding to explore. So the idea is to mark the Australian involvement in the Apollo 11 mission. There's also, at the time of the moonwalk, there's a lunch they're doing up in Canberra as well. So if you go to this website, you can find out details. You can even go ahead and book for the lunch on that website. There's a link through to one of those purchasing sites. So if you can get to Canberra, these guys, they're not getting younger and they're fascinating to talk to. We were there, a couple of few of us were there up in the 40th, and they were great. It was amazing, very memorable. All right, so coming back to Earth, coming back to us. So once again, at this stage, we are staying with our formula for fourth Monday of the month, which looks like this. And we've discussed with the venue here, if you ask that long, December 15, which is not the 4th, but it's obviously the fourth Monday in December gets a bit crazy. So we're looking at the 15th of December. So we'll just see how it all pans out. Any feedback on the venue or food or anything like that, more than welcome. Okay, so I'll do my propaganda thing. Once again, we are a non-profit group and we rely on memberships to do all the things we do. So if you are a member, thank you very much. If you were a member, please come back. If you're not a member, please come join us. And you can see Tim over there, Bill, and give them all your money, and donations gratefully accepted. Alright, so tonight we're going to talk about spacesuits. And thankfully, this is not what they used. But before we go there, we've got a very special guest in the room tonight, and I talked about those people that were involved in the Apollo program in space in the past. John Swanee has kindly come up this evening, and I'm going to bring John up to have a quick chat and introduce himself and tell us what he did and why he did it, and if you can remember that. John.
Thanks very much, Peter, and folks. Glad to see you in the room. I've just cracked 80 years of age, and I was one of the original space tracking technician and support people. Started at the Aurora station outside Canberra, another one of the group of three stations that were at Canberra, together with Honeysuckle Creek and the Deep Space station out of Abdilla, which you've probably all heard of. And can I just mention, in addition to that 50th, was it the Apollo 50th Australia site, that probably comes out of the major group of the old original space tracking group, which is at Honeysuckle Creek.
John Saxon and
yes, John Saxon and Hamish Lindsay, and a wonderful source of information. Honeysucklecreek.net, I think, is the website. And links to the whole of the early space tracking stations in Australia. Now, my actual association with the tracking stations was relatively brief, because I started at the beginning at Aurora, and I felt myself, I didn't realise it at the time, but looking back, I felt so privileged that I could work firstly in an environment that I just loved. I'd done my initial training in electronics with the ABC television, and actually managed to also start up the Rennie television station back in its early days in the late 50s. So I've covered some ground in the early days and then peaked on. But from the ABC, I was lucky enough to get selected for the staff at Aurora. Aurora was what they call the STADAN, the Space Tracking and Data Acquisition Network, and we worked round the clock 7 days a week, supporting the scientific satellites that were going up at that time, because of all the basic scientific data that needed to be acquired and analysed to make groundwork for the orbital flights, both unmanned and then later manned. So there was a tremendous amount of work done there with little recognition, but nevertheless, that was what I did. I'd been looking over the fence at Honeysuckle Creek, and they seemed to be privileged people there. They seemed to work day shifts most of the time and do training routines and get sent off to America for further training courses. And I'd actually applied for a transfer to get there, but there was contractual arrangements between the stations. The Department of Supply in those days was the agent, the Australian government agency between NASA and the actual operating stations, which were actually run by commercial operators. But I wasn't allowed to transfer there. But after a couple of years, I was allowed to transfer to the Carnarvon station, right on the west coast, which is something I'm currently being wiped out from the cyclone at the moment. It's coming down the coast. So I spent 4 years over there, and that was in the period 68 to 72, and that legally coincides with the moon landing. So again, it was just a tremendous experience to provide the support, be involved in a NASA organisation. And NASA is an absolute prime example of a well-disciplined organisation. It was really sensational the way that they had analysed everything that should happen, that could happen, what the alternatives were, and what should be done. And we finished up with flight manuals for every flight, and as to every moment of the days of every mission was planned, and the alternatives and the backups, and we did simulations after simulations. I was in the computer section there, which is the interface essentially between the unified S-band receiver systems through the big dishes and the telemetry extractors out of all those streams. So multi-stream telemetry. Excuse me, the unified S-band downlinks were I think they had about 12 different channels of everything from high-speed vehicle data, biomed, just trajectory data, responses from radar links from the ground stations and things like that. And I was senior technician and then supervising technician of the track and start of the computer section at Carnarvon when I finished. But then the last flights came up to 15 and 16, and then it stopped. And they decided they weren't even going to have the last 3 manned missions. They just saved one and petered out. My family called me back to Melbourne, and that was the end of my space tracking. So I went into computer mainframe commercial computing for 20 years after that. But certainly was a wonderful time. Really thrilled to have done that. And I was just saying to Peter that I was hoping actually to bring up my grandson-in-law to come, because at my birthday party I met him for the first time, and when he heard about the experiences that I'd had coming on 55 years ago, he was just thrilled and bombarded me with questions about how we did this and how we did that and things like that. And I was just tremendously pleased that young people these days have become involved in inquiring about that, when I think in the general field there's not terribly much interest in space work at all. Anyway, that's about a short story of me and my career.
Thank you very much. So John's going to stay around for the break, so have a chat with him and things, and I'm going to twist his arm and see if we can get him back for like a special in-depth presentation, multimedia interrogation at some point in the future. We might buy you a drink. But Yeah, thank you so much for doing that. It was completely unprompted, so really appreciate it. Right, let's flip over to our other thing. Alright, sorry about that. So now we're going to be doing a little bit of a look back at Apollo. We've done this over the last few months. People have been here in the past with it. We're looking back at Apollo 50 years from 50 years in the future. So we're calling it Footsteps to the Moon and the Countdown to Apollo 11. What's some of these old artworks? We can have you bang if you're not here.
Yeah.
So yeah, the series basically we're providing a monthly report based on sort of stuff that was happening in that particular month 50 years ago. So obviously tonight we'll be looking at January 1969. So obviously it's going to culminate in a July meeting in July this year. So we're also going to be having 3 different special focus episodes. We'll look at, actually next month's going to be a cracker. We're going to be looking at the Soviet space effort, moon effort, which there wasn't a whole lot of information in the West about, and they could have kind of kept things pretty quiet, but we've got our agents on the go for that, so they're going to be giving us an inside report. Then we're going to be looking at the Australian activities. We're going to certainly include Aurora Valley in that. What was happening in terms of Creek and Parks, and I did an interview with a gentleman that created an experiment that actually flew to the moon in Australia, so fascinating. So we'll hopefully incorporate that in some way. That's in April. And then in June we're going to be looking at the decision to the Barramundi. Decision to the Barramundi. Yeah. Decision to have the architecture of the new mission away and down. Is it calamari? Was it calamari?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Right, so for those of you who are on Facebook and saw the event, I did warn you that tonight's going to involve time travel. So I hope you've got a good stomach, because it can be quite dramatic for people. So first of all, we're going to start off in 2019. 2 great leaders of the world discussing the environment of the world in politics. But it's not the first time that's happened. This isn't the time for it. Now look slowly into the centre of the history, travelling back 50 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, and now we're back in 1969, and 2 great leaders discussing the world. Things really don't change, do they? Alright, so what was happening in the world in '69? Well, there was a committee set up by the US Air Force to investigate UFOs. and they submitted, they called it the Condon Committee, and they released its report, essentially saying there's nothing. They basically said that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added scientific knowledge, careful consideration of the record as it is available to us leads us to conclude that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified. So basically they end up cancelling after that. January 14, the USS Enterprise had a major fire on board. It killed a bunch of people, 28 people, 314 injured. And in January 17, there's an antitrust lawsuit by the US Justice Department against IBM, charging them with monopolising the digital computer industry. Don't know a bit about that. The suit will continue until 1982. And then just dropped. The technology moved on, I think. Elsewhere, January 20, Mr. Richard Nixon was sworn in as the president. This is interesting. The stuff you find out doing this research. An assassination attempt was made on Leonid Brezhnev. Though he was unhurt, the shots killed the driver and lightly injured several celebrated cosmonauts. I wish Eagle was here. Do you know anything about that?
Yep.
Okay. Well, we might find out a bit more about that next week. Next month.
Alexei Lerov was in the car.
Was he?
Yeah.
Alright.
The theory is he mistook Gary Barakovoy film so as the Ray Brezhnev because he had very thick eyebrows. So he shot at the wrong car.
Well, I would have been in greater danger of being in a Russian car.
So the attacker was captured in the blackout, is maintained. I don't know when the rest played out. Do you know when it was?
Not long after.
Oh, is that right? Okay. I'm sure the CIA might have been trying to circulate that. And in Vietnam, obviously Vietnam War was raging on in 1968. So there was this Battle of Hat Ditch. It lasted 78 days and it was fairly successful for the Allies. The war raged on, so still happening and pretty tragic. Alright, how important cultural news. The Beatles gave what was turned out to be the last public performance. They did it on the roof of the Apple building, lasted 42 minutes. And the police were called and eventually said, sorry guys, we have to finish it off because it's disturbing the neighbourhood. Well, John Lennon quote at the end, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves and hope we pass the early dish. So let's have a quick listen. Don't let me down. for my dinner. So what else was happening in Australia? There's big bushfires here. Nothing seems to change. In Victoria, 17 people died in a grass fire. Involved Bourke cars on Princess Highway in Geelong. And Johnny Famechon becomes a world featherweight champion when he defeats Cuban Jose Legra in Aylward in London. Here is your top 10. Your top 10 in Australia. Probably some of us have got those records at home still. No? None? Alright, so what was happening actually with Apollo now? So this is, as I've kind of mentioned over the last few months, there were just so many things that were happening at the same time, and I've only just taken a tiny little percentage of them over the last few months, and the same this month. You know, the lunar module, the assassin stage of the lunar module was at the Beth Page Assembly Plant, getting ready to be transported to KSC. Out at KSC, the Apollo 9 Saturn V stack was rolling out to the vehicle, to the launch pad. January 9, the actual Apollo 11 crew were officially announced, introduced to the world, Buzz, Neil and Mike. And back at Kennedy Space Center, there were so many things happening. Apollo 9 out on the pad. Apollo 10's lunar module is preparing for mating with the spacecraft. January 12, the descent stage of Apollo 11's lunar module was arrived at Kennedy Space Center. You've never seen that before. And January 9, now the Apollo 9's Saturn V was out at the pad, so the crew were out there doing emergency egress training. So it's actually quite fascinating. You see them, they don these emergency oxygen packs, plug them in, and then they take off down the emergency escape elevator or the slideway device. Apparently, someone mentioned in the video they had a camera obviously there. Apollo 8, apparently Frank Borman, when he was doing this, actually fell over trying to get that thing on his head. So, I guess that practice a few more times. So Apollo 11's command module was finally finished and ready for shipping out to KSC, and it arrived there on the 22nd of January along with its service module. 26th, I mentioned before, the Apollo 9 crew were doing these emergency egress training, etc. So these guys actually, not all, but some of them, well, no, not the crew, but one of the astronauts, Stu Russo, and people jumped in the actual slide wire thing, and with it's hard to see, there's actual cable that runs all the way around there, and they would jump in, come across the access arm, jump in there, hit the button, and slide down there, then they would go into these tank things and drive off and do this and that.
Interestingly, years later, the shuttle system had no such thing. And there was no way of getting the crew out.
They had a slide wire with a basket.
Not initially, they didn't have a fortunately.
No. Alright, on January 3, so there's a whole lot of management type things happening. Apollo 9 continued on schedule, roll out in space from Otis already in the VAB. 15-17, Apollo 9 was verified, the emergency egress test, etc. was done, no completing something. The 19th to 22nd, they had the Apollo 9 flight readiness review, readiness test. 1 day delay in the testing caused the loss of air conditioning for a computer. The hatch and the side windows of the spacecraft being modified to overcome fogging effect that they'd experienced in Apollo 8. People might recall seeing those fogging and stuff that was fogging up the windows in Apollo 8. 24th to 29th, recovery training exercise out in the Gulf for the Apollo 9 guys. 24th, the Command Service Module Readiness Review Board convening. And they basically reported on all the different vehicles ready for the next few missions. 31st, this is interesting, 30 small aluminum fittings were placed on all the lunar modules and reinforced due to rule out the possibility of crack from stress corrosion. Now, this is very exclusive, it's all right. I don't know if people quite look into it, but it's going to heard of this. This was a thing. No, not the cat. Does anyone know where that's from? That is Star Trek. Gary Seven, was it, or something? Yeah. Anyway, here's how the story goes. The S4B stage had arrived at KC. This is the one for Apollo 11, and was in a low bay test cell, getting ready for standing. One of the engineers, Hugh Nichols, discovered a note plastered in a mirror in the men's bathroom, which read, "I've fixed the vehicle, you won't find it in time." This happened. Now, this was shortly after McDonnell Douglas strike was placed, and so they were under suspicion initially. All the FBI interrogated everybody, no one knew anything about it. Every system was retested using their basic testing, and no faults were found. However, they still weren't comfortable that a little nip in a wire or something that could be imperceptible to their standard testing might be sitting there and could cause a disaster. So there was really no way to be certain. So, this is the configuration of the vehicle assembly building. This is where the final stack of the vehicle is. This is the low bay area here, which is where the stages come in for their initial testing and configuration ready to be stacked. So FBI were able to identify the part with fingerprints because it was stuck on by a bit of soap. The prints were those of a senior McDonnell Douglas manager. Apparently he and some of the guys got out for some what they call 3 martini lunch. Came back and they decided to have a bit of fun. Of course, he was terminated immediately, and initially he denied it. However, the chief engineer for the vehicle operation at the time still considers to this day the biggest nightmare in the whole space program. Now, once again, I wasn't able to find much reference to this, in your normal Google searches and online. However, this is contained in this book, which has recently been released, and it's a fantastic book. It's a bit nerdy, which is kind of fits our demographically. It's called Countdown to the Moon. It goes through in a chronological order all the stages and steps for the different vehicles and the different systems for the Apollo program, particularly in the Apollo 11. So that's how. So I've got the bookmarker there. If you want to read the entire segment, it's only about 2.5 pages. Get the full details. I don't need crazy summarize it here. Please do so. This is the book, page 183 from the book. So the book's well worth reading if you have an interest in that, not just for that subject. Now, some of us have been to the VAB recently. In fact, Mike and I were there just recently, and that test stand is actually still in the vehicle assembly building as it was, except it's down the bottom. So they still sit there. So it's kind of nice bit of history. Alright, so. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? We can rebuild it. So we had a call tonight, Bras in Space, fashioning the Apollo spacesuit, and rather than going through a 38-minute description of it, I thought I'd just turn to a DVD. So stand by, and we'll do that now. I think it covers it quite nicely. Obviously, it's
In the early 1960s, as NASA began training astronauts to In the early 1960s, as NASA began training astronauts to meet President Kennedy's challenge, it realized there was one key area of expertise it knew nothing about. Nobody knew how to build a spacesuit that would enable a human being to survive in the lethal lunar environment.
There was enough cartoons and little movie clips and stuff like that around that you had this excitement about space. But you had no clue. So it was something brand spanking new.
NASA was designing spaceships, you know, the Saturn, the Apollo, the lunar module, all these pieces of hard goods. They knew how to bolt metal together. They could do drawings. They understood that. But when it came to a spacesuit, you're talking fabrics. And when you try taking it from the world that knows hard goods, it became a real problem.
Joe Cosmo, a young science graduate, remembers being called by a puzzled NASA engineer.
He says, "We're wondering if you might be interested in working in some new areas that we're starting, life support and spacesuits, whatever they are." And that was his exact words, whatever they are. And he said, "Does that sound of interest to you?" Of course, I'm looking for a job and I want to get in the space program. And I said, "Well, you know, my background is in propulsion and structures. I don't know much about spacesuits." His remark was, "Well, no one else does either, and we're all going to learn."
But learn from what? In the early years of what became known as the Apollo program, there was very little experience to draw on. The first man to wear the sort of suit the astronauts would need was U.S. aviation pioneer Wiley Post. In the 1930s, Post commissioned a flying suit for an attempt on the world altitude record.
They had taken a diving helmet from a diving suit, and because Wiley Post was blind in one eye, they had physically moved the optical viewport off to one side to make it easier for him to get the best possible visibility.
Post's suit enabled him to reach 50,000 feet, higher than the cruising altitude of a modern airliner. At this altitude, temperatures drop to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and oxygen levels become dangerously low. Over the next 20 years, rocket planes took men even higher. To help them, a new generation of high-altitude suits were constructed.
Looking real good from back here. And they look very good across the door.
The X-15 was basically a very compact, very slender, rocket-looking type aircraft that was carried to high altitude under the wing of a B-52. And since it used rockets rather than jet engines for propulsion, was capable of not only high altitude and speed records, but was also capable of suborbital spaceflight.
It was followed in 1959 by America's first space program. Mercury put man into orbit around the Earth. But in all these craft, the cockpit provided the first line of safety. The flying suits were only there in case there was an accident. Kennedy's plan to have men leave this safety and step out onto the moon would demand something much more sophisticated. To illustrate the challenge, NASA introduced the U.S. public to a new cartoon figure, Andy Astronaut.
If Andy were to step out on the surface of the moon without a spacesuit, this is what would happen. In the near vacuum of space, the gases within his body would immediately expand. His blood would appear to boil from the rapid expansion of gases coming out of solution in his bloodstream. Andy would soon feel the effects of another condition of space, lack of oxygen. After 20 seconds in a vacuum and without oxygen, Andy would be trading in his astronaut wings for a more permanent variety.
The problem was to build a spacesuit that could be pumped full of air to compensate for the lack of atmosphere, but also remained supple and flexible. Early prototype pressure suits were almost rigid.
A suit is like a balloon. You know, if you're going to have 3.5 psi inside it and vacuum outside it, then something has to keep all that air in. So think of the suit as a balloon. And if you have a cylinder, which is what we made, it's very difficult to bend it.
NASA realized it needed to draw on new areas of expertise. And in 1962, tenders were invited from U.S. industry to build the first Apollo spacesuit. 8 companies submitted proposals. Most were well-known names in the aerospace industry, but one was not. The International Latex Corporation was best known for its Playtex bras and girdles. The company was the rank outsider, but it had one big advantage. It didn't know much about space, but it knew more than any of its competitors about making flexible rubber clothes that moved with the human body.
We had a lot of experience with dipping rubber products such as ladies' bras and girdles and things of that nature, so we knew we might have a good in with building a great suit.
The company's prototype was based on a series of flexible rubber joints.
The elbows and the joints all flex because of this system right here. It was a convolute, and a convolute is really nothing more than a rubber dip part that has all these little ridges to it. It allows the air to compress on either side and move about so that you weren't fighting against a pressurized cylinder. So where your elbow flexes and your knee flexes and your ankle flexes, this allows that to flex back and forth. In addition, it has these metal cables right here, and these take the load of the suit, because when the suit's under pressure, it's under tremendous load, and you don't want those legs growing any longer, the arms growing any longer. So all the strength within that suit, because of the pressure, has to go through these metal cables right here on either side. And they also act as a hinge, because as this suit's flexing and walking about on the surface, or you're bending your elbow, these cables right here allow it to flex back and forth.
It was simple and obvious, but nobody else had anything quite like it. And in April 1962, NASA took a gamble and awarded ILC, as the company became known, the contract to build the Apollo spacesuit. But there was a catch. ILC knew all about rubber clothing, but had almost no experience of handling major government contracts. So NASA appointed another company to oversee the whole operation. Hamilton Standard was an established engineering facility that had originally pitched for the whole contract. The company's engineers were surprised and delighted to have a role in the program.
When I told my girlfriend I was going to go work on putting a man on the moon, she asked me what I had been drinking. Was I sure I was sane? And a few other things like that.
But the wedding between Hamilton and ILC was a marriage between two very different companies and would, in the years to come, cause NASA deep concern. By summer 1962, the cracks in the arranged marriage between ILC and Hamilton Standard were beginning to show. Tom Harala worked for Hamilton Standard.
We were making propellers for both commercial aircraft and also for the Department of Defense. International Latex at that time made brassieres. We had two totally different personalities.
His opposite number at ILC was Homer Ream.
There was always this skepticism of Hamilton Standard's appreciation for our technology and our concern for Hamilton Standard, not thinking that consumer products people are capable of doing this job.
This was a very interesting relationship because both organizations thought they should be the ones leading the challenge, and it was described by many as a shotgun marriage.
But despite the obvious rivalries, in the early months, nobody wanted to dwell on the problems. NASA was demanding results. At ILC, the first suits were turned from prototypes into production models.
Our industry was fortunate because a lot of the people that had worked in Playtex were very good with sewing. They could sew ladies' products together. So we took a lot of those talented sewers and brought them over to the Spacesuit line.
I was sewing baby pants, and then an engineer came to me and asked me if I would mind trying something else. And I said no. But I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be making spacesuits.
It demanded greater care and attention than anybody at the factory had ever experienced before.
It was critical that these seams were sewn to within about a 32nd of an inch, which is just about smaller than a pin. And these tolerances had to work every time. They had to be perfect.
Everything was inspected. They had to count those stitches and make sure we didn't have less or more in every inch.
The sewing machines were just walking very slowly, stitch by stitch, to make these suits, to put them together.
One of the hazards was sewing pins. Even a single one left in a suit by mistake could cause a fatal accident in space. Eleanor Foraker was expected to keep track of them. She gave each seamstress different colored pins so she could trace who had done what.
I was walking by an inspection table one day, and I saw a pin. It had a red head on it. So I checked the paperwork, and I found out who did that. And I went to the lady, and I asked her, and she just kept looking at me and said, I didn't do it. I said, well, I'll tell you what, here's your pin. And I jabbed her in the behind with it.
Meanwhile, at Hamilton Standard, engineers were facing a different set of challenges. Their job, as well as supervising the contract, was to build the life support system, the backpack that provided the astronaut with oxygen and kept the spacesuit pressurized at a comfortable temperature. They called it an environmental control system. It was Earl Ball's job to design it.
Nobody had ever done this before. We were going to make effectively a little space vehicle with a suit and this environmental control system.
One of the challenges was to provide the maximum oxygen for the minimum weight. To do this, Ball used what's known as a rebreathing system.
Now, normally when you breathe, you exhale oxygen and CO2, and that is just blown away, and you waste all that oxygen that you've just exhaled.
Hamilton's system removed the carbon dioxide from the exhaled oxygen by passing it through lithium hydroxide. It meant the same oxygen could be used over and over again. It was at least 20% more efficient than a traditional aqualung. Hamilton, in its capacity as environmental control experts, was also responsible for what was delicately referred to as waste management. Don Rethke became known as Dr. Flush for his ingenuity in dealing with the issue.
There was no bathroom, as you and I know it. There was no cosmic commode. And their training was not that good to hold it for several days. So they needed some degree of body hygiene, if you want to call it.
Don always was able to put humor behind the work that he was doing, and many times it was appropriate because he got pretty crappy jobs to deal with.
This is the pee pouch and this is the poo pouch, okay? Don't get the two confused, because the wrong pouch will not work in the right place. So inside the urine collection assembly, which we kind of affectionately call the pee pouch, was about a 1 liter bag in the area down here. And the attachment to the body was done by a condom with a hose on the end of it, which you can urinate right into the bag.
The condoms initially came in 3 different sizes: small, medium, and large. But few astronauts, whatever their real dimensions, were willing to accept they were anything but large. So NASA changed the categories.
We changed the name to large, gigantic, and humongous. So large still worked.
Gradually, piece by piece, the life support system came together. What nobody realized as they started to test the suit was that there was a potentially lethal flaw. In 1963, as NASA put the Apollo spacesuit through its paces, they discovered they had a problem. Everybody had assumed that cool air pumped into the suit from the backpack would be sufficient to regulate the temperature. But as astronauts now started to use the suits, they were becoming dangerously overheated. NASA panicked.
In October of 1963, NASA gave Hamilton a 2-week ultimatum to demonstrate a solution to the astronaut cooling problem.
The whole program is in jeopardy. It was a threat that we would lose our contract if we didn't measure up to NASA's requirements.
Unfortunately, that wasn't as easy as people expected.
Dave Jennings was charged with finding a solution in record time. He was shown designs of a British garment which used water-filled plastic tubes. Jennings set up an experiment to see how well it worked. Harlan Brosey was his test subject.
We wrapped his arms and legs in PVC tubing.
We then put a sweatsuit across my body. Then, in addition, to make sure that we didn't evaporate anything off of the sweatsuit, we put a plastic suit over me. Plastic boots, plastic gloves, plastic all over, so that no water could possibly get away from the body. including my head, I believe, was covered with a plastic bonnet.
The idea was to ensure that none of Brozzi's body heat could escape. Then the PVC tubes were hooked up to a bucket of iced water.
Well, when they turned on the cooling, it was just like jumping into Lake Superior. Man alive, was that cold. And then the treadmill wasn't running yet. I said, turn on the treadmill. Let's get warmed up a little bit.
And the treadmill was slanted at different elevations to make him produce the kind of effort he would if he was climbing a steep hill and walking fast, doing a great deal of exercise.
The cooling effect was very comfortable. I don't recall cold spots or hot spots.
The system worked well, and NASA charged Hamilton with building a water-cooled undergarment.
The cool water flowed into the connector and through the tubing to be circulated around the user's body.
There were hundreds of feet of fine tubing running over the entire body. Hamilton's system would become the standard method of keeping astronauts cool in space.
That was very good.
By early 1964, ILC and Hamilton were sending a stream of completed suits to NASA in Houston. Tom Harala was entrusted with their delivery.
I drove it to my hotel, and then I had to take it out of my car and I had to bring it into my room and keep it in my room overnight to make sure that no one could tamper with it, steal it, or whatever it was, because it was classified confidential. It was also worth probably a pretty penny. So yeah, the first suit I delivered to NASA, I slept with it. It wasn't very enjoyable either.
Almost immediately, NASA began to reject them.
They were bulky, they were tough to move around in, they were tough to wear, they were heavy, and so the customer wasn't very happy about them. They expected to see much more progress.
One of the tests was in an aircraft that was used to simulate lunar gravity. You had to be able to fall on your back like a turtle and then successfully get back up without any assistance. Unfortunately, the new design spacesuit wasn't able to do that.
There are laws of physics that say you can't do certain things.
As the difficulties mounted, the long-suppressed differences between Hamilton and ILC bubbled to the surface.
Hamilton Standard would come down to our facility and try to tell us how to build suits, and they thought they were helping us, but there was more turmoil involved in this process than needed to be.
Our companies had totally different types of personalities in terms of how we dealt with products and how we dealt with the paperwork that supported the product.
Here we are trying to build a suit that the industry would find acceptable, and it just wasn't working. It was a very poor marriage, and it just didn't work.
2 years into the Apollo contract, the development basically reached a crisis stage. There was no more time. NASA was planning to fly the first Apollo flights in 1966, and the Apollo spacesuit was simply not ready to support that.
In autumn 1964, NASA despaired of the suit ever meeting its test standards and took the enormous step of canceling the contract. The Apollo program was without a working spacesuit, or even anybody to build it. In spring 1965, NASA relaunched the Apollo spacesuit program. For some years, it had been hedging its bets and also investigating so-called hard suits. Many were like medieval suits of armor. Yet, try as they might, the designers of these remarkable garments couldn't reduce their bulk. And NASA once more solicited proposals for a soft suit. Once again, Hamilton Standard submitted a design. So did ILC. The two old partners were now in competition.
We only had 6 weeks to develop this suit and put it into the competition, which was quite a challenge. So we had engineers working around the clock. They were breaking into rooms to try to get parts they needed because they'd be there at 2 in the morning trying to put the suit together.
It was a frightening time in the factory. The only thing that kept it from being desperation, I would guess, was our dream that we would be successful.
The hard work paid off. ILC, free at last to follow its instincts as a clothing manufacturer, came up with a new, flexible, and close-fitting suit that was better than any of the competition.
We ended up winning the competition because our suit had great flexibility. It was built the way we wanted to build it. It had great narrow shoulders. You can look at the pictures and see how tapered this suit was compared to the other two suits.
The administrative difference was that ILC was now contracted directly to NASA. Hamilton was awarded a separate contract to continue building the life support system. The two companies were equals, and NASA would keep the peace between them. The suit now consisted of 3 separate garments. The water-cooled layer, an extraordinarily clever pressurized inner suit with flexible joints, and a white outer garment finished in a toughened nylon fabric that provided protection from the extremes of temperature in space. These can vary from -300 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade to +300 degrees in direct sunlight. The lunar boot had a large flat sole to prevent the astronauts from sinking into the soft lunar surface. The helmet had a series of sun visors to protect the astronauts from solar glare. And then there was the glove, probably the most complex and troublesome piece of the entire garment.
You wanted a glove that could pick up a dime but stop a bullet, and it was very difficult to do at the time.
After various permutations, the outside was eventually made from a brand new material called Chromel R.
And it was actually woven chromium steel, and it was woven into a material that would flex like a fabric, and we used that all around the gauntlet of the glove, which is the part that wraps around the main part of the hand. And this material was $2,000 a yard, which was phenomenal at that time. So it was a very unique material developed just for the spacesuit.
It was a nightmare for the seamstresses to work with, but gradually the new suits took shape. As the suits rolled off the production line, they were exhaustively tested. The company's guinea pig was Tom Sylvester.
I ran, I kicked and punted and passed and did a rolling block like they do in football.
From the rigid bladder of just 5 years before, the suit had come a very long way. It was still pumped full of air like a balloon, but it moved like a normal suit of clothing. To test the suit in reduced gravity, NASA turned the world on its side.
They would take the suit and suspend it in this crazy contraption where they suspended the astronauts or test subjects in the suit, and they would walk along this wall with this rig.
Dave Jennings tried it out.
I had free use of my legs, both legs, independently. I could jump and bounce around, and just like the pictures of the actual astronauts on the actual moon. Exactly. I did the same thing, big leaps and bounds. I found out that I could do somersaults, and I found out I could do backward somersaults, which is something that I always wanted to be able to do. These backward somersaults were so much fun that I did a dozen of them. And here were all these engineers standing around watching me, with their mouths open, I suppose.
But the ultimate and most dangerous test was a huge, specially constructed vacuum chamber.
They were able to pull all the air out to create a big vacuum, just like it would be on the moon. That way we could test our suits to make sure there was no leakage.
One such test narrowly avoided disaster. Jim LeBlanc was the test subject in the vacuum chamber. Cliff Hess, the supervising engineer outside.
Jim, while you're exercising, I'd like you to stay intermediate all the time, okay? I'm pretty cool right now. Okay, well, you'll warm up here in a minute, so let's stay right here if you can stand it.
The testing started just normally, like they all do. And Jim was at a vacuum in the spacesuit.
Well, I feel pretty good there.
With all the air sucked out, all that protected him was his pressurized suit. Then something happened.
I heard over the headset that he was losing suit pressure.
The tube pressurizing his suit had become disconnected. He was in serious danger.
There really wasn't any feeling. It was just happening so fast, you know, trying to get the chamber back to a safe pressure and Jim to a safe pressure was inside the suit.
As I stumbled backwards, I could feel the saliva on my tongue starting to bubble just before I went unconscious. And that's kind of the last thing I remember.
Essentially, he had no pressure on the outside of his body, and that's a very unusual case to get, and there's very little in the medical literature as to what happens when you have that. There's a lot of conjecture, you know, that your fluids will boil.
Within 25 seconds, a co-worker, sitting in a partially pressurized antechamber and wearing an oxygen mask, was able to dash in. At the normal rate of repressurization, it would have taken 30 minutes to make the chamber safe. Hess repressurized it in just over a minute.
That's much, much faster than you would ever come down in an airplane. It would really hurt your ears if you did that.
Finally, it was safe to let a doctor in. Miraculously, LeBlanc had already regained consciousness.
When I stood up in the chamber, I felt fine. My ears ached a little bit from the course of rapid repressurization, and that's basically the only effect I had.
You know, it was one of the few instances where anybody was ever exposed to that low of a pressure and lived to tell about it with no obvious damage.
Such an accident in space would have been fatal. But thanks to testing like this, no astronaut has ever had to face a similar situation. The suits were holding up to everything that could be thrown at them, and the program was back on schedule. On January 27, 1967, the Apollo 1 command module caught fire during a practice countdown.
I got a call from one of my people in Houston, and he goes, "You probably didn't hear it, but they had a catastrophic fire at the Kennedy Center."
All 3 crew members died in the intense heat of the blaze.
That was quite a shock. I almost had to pull over to the side of the road, catch my breath, because I thought, well, this is the end of our future.
The program started to just churn. Churn and churn and churn.
NASA demanded that all inflammable material be removed from the outside of the suit. But what to replace it with?
I felt as though this was going to probably be the biggest of all the challenges yet. And then when we got into it, it proved me to be right in spades. It was bigger than any challenge we had gotten into.
The company scoured the country, talking to manufacturers working at the cutting edge of fabric technology. They needed something that was tough, flexible, and non-flammable.
We had to take research-type materials and convert them into materials you could use and then put them in a spacesuit. It was a horrendous effort by a lot of people.
Ream eventually tracked down a brand new material called beta cloth.
It was a woven fiberglass that was actually coated with Teflon before it was woven together to form this outer layer of the suit that protected against temperatures up to about 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
It was completely non-flammable and offered protection from temperatures way above anything ever likely to be encountered, even in an emergency. NASA was satisfied. Apollo missions 7, 8, 9, and 10 took men into space without a hitch. Then came July 1969, and the biggest test of all.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. I'm going to step off the limb now.
As the Apollo 11 astronauts stepped out on the moon, the world celebrated. But for those who had built the suits, the moonwalk was several hours of pure anxiety.
As Neil Armstrong came down the ladder and they started doing their things on the moon, I had a smile on my face, but in my stomach were all these butterflies.
We've worked hard for about 8 or 9 years to make this happen. And when you actually see it happening, one side of your mind is saying, is this real? The other side is, wow, this is great. I just hope he doesn't fall over.
When the astronauts started jumping up and down, we were concerned that the pressure garment underneath of the outer layer could come up with a small leak or something like that. And we didn't want any accidents.
Every time they stumbled or tripped or fell, it was kind of like a little white knuckle grab and gulp a little bit.
The astronauts were obviously euphorically enjoying what they were doing and seemed to be ad-libbing a little bit of activity as they were going on. And every time this ad-libbing would come up, I could think of nothing but, please go back up that ladder and get back into the safety of that lunar module. All I could think of was the world is looking at ILC right now, and we need to get this over with.
It was 2.5 hours before the Apollo 11 astronauts finally returned to the lunar module.
When he went back up the ladder and shut that door, that was the happiest moment of my life. It wasn't until quite a while later that I reveled over the accomplishment.
I had tears rolling down my cheeks. I mean, I was just crying in happiness because all that work that we'd done, all those chores that we'd done and everything like that.
The suit and backpack had done everything expected of them, and in the years to come, enabled man to walk, run, jump, and work on the moon without a single significant failure.
It's a football-sized rock. It's a great Scott size.
It was the culmination of a long time, and it was very, very satisfying. It's the best thing we've ever done.
But this two-legged thing is great. Man, I can cover ground like a kangaroo. How'd you like that? Beautiful maneuver there, Charlie. What do you do for an encore? It's the old boulder rolling trick. Don't hit the rover. Think you've got a lot of too. No, that's okay. Hey, John, this is perfect with the limb and the rover and you and the old flag. Come on out here and give me a salute.
That's fantastic. You too. Obviously, we've run out of time, as per usual, but we'll just keep plodding along here. Not far to go now, from me anyway. So I hope you enjoyed that. Probably a lot of scenes, but seen it before, but it's nice to see it explained. Alright, so now it's time to time travel again. We're in 1969 at a pop concert. No, I don't think it was my mum, I'm not sure. We're going to do our time travel again. Got to fast forward back to 2019. Off we go, off we go. And what's happening in 2019 with the pop concerts? Yeah, go through that. There you go. Alright, well thank you for that. So next month we're going to take a subtle side diversion and look at the Soviet program. And that's with Arthur and Igor Roscoe. Is he Igor? So he and Mark are going to be doing that presentation together. So with that we'll see you back here on the 25th. And what we'll do now is we'll take a 10-minute break. Get up, walk around, put the lights up, go to the toilet, get a drink, and then we're going to pick up after that with space news. Just a reminder, you need to pick up your bill on the way out, so you can speak with it downstairs, just say who you witness what you have and tick it off on their system. Appreciate that. So we're back onto the lights down, and over now. Angelo, Grazia.
Okay. Oh, I'm using the microphone. Okay. Take your seats and strap in. I'll strap in. I'll take you through a little ride of fantasy here, because I've got a few fantasy items to talk about. Anyway, welcome. I'm Angelo Grazia. For those that don't know me, I'm one of the committee at the Space Association. For those that do know me, bad luck. Moving on. There was a tough 2 months that I had to catch up with. So this presentation doesn't cover all the space news because, as you might know, there's just so much of it. But I'm going to race through it because I want to get to some of my favourite items that most people would know what they're about. They're all about SpaceX, really. But anyway, moving on. First, we'll talk about Australian space. The Australian Space Agency, finally, it was announced that they are going to be headquartered in South Australia. And it's probably the right place because they do have sort of the technology background. And the Prime Minister, made a few comments about, he said that his meagre $41 million investment in the Space Agency will result in $12 billion and up to 20,000 jobs by 2030, which would be a fantastic outcome. It will be located at the old Royal Adelaide Hospital site and will be developed there. As you can see from there, there's a number of organisations and government defence contractors that are already there, so there's quite a, in the end it made sense. I would love to have had it in Melbourne, but I think it's probably in the right place. Now, Southern Launch, who are they? Well, they're going to start building infrastructure, launching infrastructure to deploy nanosatellites with payloads between 50 and 400 kilograms, like the Electron rocket lab. And they're proposing on the Eyre Peninsula in South Australia. So they did an extensive search around Australia and they picked on the Eyre Peninsula. Offers the ability to launch rockets into polar or sun-synchronous and has the obvious advantage of being near major infrastructures. It's a place called Whalers Bay, and it's called the Whalers Bay Orbital Launch Complex, not far from Port Lincoln, and they're under discussions with a number of launch suppliers to tailor the launch site. And they proposed to start construction this year and finish this year. It's working with the Australian government, or the South Australian government and the Australian Space Agency, and there it is. So anyone that kind of knows Adelaide and along Port Lincoln, that's where they're proposing. I was surprised maybe somebody here knows why it's only sun-synchronous and polar orbits. It leaves, doesn't give it as much versatility as being able to launch at lower inclinations. Anyway, there's the Electron.
Because it'll go up in Melbourne if they launched out later.
Moving on, Rocket Lab. Well, there it is, Electron. There it is in New Zealand, the windiest part you could pick for a launch site. They picked it. They had a launch in the 16th of December, and it was the second commercial flight. Does anyone remember the name of it? No? Not business as usual, something like that. Deployed 13 small satellites, some of which were NASA CubeSat satellites. So it was actually a real commercial venture. And the next mission is expected in February. Numbers from early to late February. They're going to launch another Electron, and this time they're launching for DARPA, which is a US Defence Department research project. And they're proposing to do 12 launches this year, so it'll be good to see. And there you have it. And there's that nice windswept launch pad over there. Now I'll talk about NASA. As you probably know, the 5-week government shutdown affected all non-essential US government agencies. Some key government workers did continue to work on some of the NASA jobs, but a lot of them without pay, incidentally. They realise they probably will get paid eventually, but it's pretty hard when you're trying to make the income cash flow work. The White House formally re-established the US Space Command. This is different from the Space Force. The Space Command is now the 11th military command that they have, and the last one was established, was taken out in 2002, and it is, like I said, it's not part of the Space Force or the Air Force Space Command. That stuff is still going on in the background. There's Pentagon reports that are coming out that still don't acknowledge the disassociation of the space responsibilities from the Air Force. So there's still a few little battles looming, even though Mr. Trump certainly wants a Space Force. Another piece of information, due to congressional opposition, NASA has indefinitely postponed a visit to the US by the head of Roscosmos, Dmitry Rogozin. He was invited by Jim Bridenstine in late 2018 when he was in Russia. Interestingly enough, the FBI, or not the FBI, CIA has classed him as,
sanctions because it's part of the US government. So the Russian government when Ukraine was annexed.
Correct. Exactly right. So he was part of that people they hold responsible for the Crimea takeover. And there he is. There's Jim Bridenstine, who's the NASA administrator, and Dmitry Rogozin. US space policy. A second effort will be made this year to pass a commercial space regulatory reform bill. It's really about keeping the space station open to 2030, and I think there's been movement of recent times to make that happen. And I think it'll probably get the nod now that the government's back in working operation. No, Len?
I don't know, I'm just shaking my head in disbelief. That's just crazy decision.
Anyway, that's the issue at the moment, and the other thing is that they're going to again try to relax some of the conditions and legislation surrounding commercial space. So they'll have another go at this. A House is also proposing to give NASA $21.5 billion this year, but the big elephant in the room is the James Webb Space Telescope. They had to increase the budget by another $800 million, and I think they've had enough. And there is real serious talk about potentially cancelling, but they've already spent something like $2.5 billion on it. So I doubt they'll cancel it, but it's a serious issue. The other thing is we've got Mike Griffin, who was also a previous administrator. He's now part of what's now the New Space Development Agency in the Pentagon. Now what will happen is he'll get taken in to the Space Force when that happens. Again, because some of his stuff overlaps some of the Air Force stuff, there's bound to be a little bit of friction between the two. ISS. Again, these two guys, Nelson, Democrat, and Senator Cruz from Republican Texas. By the way, Bill Nelson didn't win his last round of elections, so he's out. But before he leaves, he's working with Ted to extend the space station. The other thing we've had is we had MS-11 Soyuz arrive at the ISS, and it was the first time that people actually flew from the aborted mission MS-10 in October. So the cosmonauts were aboard there, and they joined 3 others in the space station. There he's going up. Oops, back. Here we go. The crew of the previously aborted have been given new mission assignments. These two guys join this lady, and they will go up at the MS-11 flight. Sorry, MS-12. The hole in the Soyuz. There it is, the Soyuz. They did a bit of a check, and geez, I don't know how they found the hole from the outside. It's pretty good work. In the meanwhile, MS-09 returned back to Earth, but the Russian cosmonaut who actually did the spacewalk came back and said the hole in the Soyuz spacecraft was drilled from inside. He basically said it, and he said it was up to investigators to determine the actual cause. He'll bring all the evidence. He brought all the evidence back, and a report is expected in March. But he said he dismissed rumours that one of the members of the station's crew created the hole while in orbit. You shouldn't think so badly of our crew. Originally, the finger was pointed at some of the American astronauts, so pretty amazing stuff.
There was a report on, there's an American space show, with respect to Andrew's Australian space show, there's an American space show by David Livingston, and he had a guy on last week that said it's a Russian smoke screen and there are big problems inside the Russian space industry.
Absolutely. And
that there's workforce problems and all sorts of things, and it could have been anyone, but it's from inside the Russians.
Yeah.
I wish Igor was here.
In fact, our friend Dmitry Rogozin got a bit of a washing down from I think he's the president of Russia.
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, and he said, stop with all the grandstanding and do something.
Yeah, but try to blame the astronauts on the space station, blame the Americans, blame everybody, but all the evidence, all the circumstantial evidence is that it's inside Russia.
The Russians are in a real pickle at the moment, and I suspect Mark and Igor will cover a bit of that at the next meeting. Sorry?
They could have been killed.
I know, dreadful thing. But it appears that it's probably been drilled somewhere on the ground at some point. During manufacture, during fit out, something of that nature.
And then repair.
Anyway, it's the Russian space program. The former glory of that program is now in absolute tatters.
How did it get up into space then, if it had the hole?
Because it was actually plugged up. And it was, and the plug had actually let loose in space, and they started leaking. And that's how they came. All right. The exciting news, of course, is this year we're going to see this happen. We're going to have men fly out of the US on either, or both, in fact, SpaceX Dragon 2 and the Starliner CST-100. Boeing, this is the current schedule. There's an uncrewed flight, March to OFT1, second quarter, that's wrong. Sorry, that's wrong. Second quarter pad aboard, August crewed, and December will be operational missions. I suspect that will be delayed from Boeing. There it is. This is the video, but I'm not going to play it. I haven't got time. There was a crew reassignment only last week. We had Eric Bowe on the left was replaced by Mike Fink. Eric will become assistant to the chief of the Astronauts Office for Commercial Crew, which is a position that Mike currently holds. And the reason why is unspecified medical conditions, so we don't know what they are. But that's the latest on that crew assignment. Now we get to SpaceX. 23rd of February, no earlier than. Was the 7th, we'll have demonstration mission 1, DM1. The second quarter, we're going to have a crew Dragon in-flight abort test, and in June, they're still talking about, I thought it is a bit later than that, but it will probably slip. They're talking about having the first man flight out of the Cape. So we're only 6 months away, which is pretty exciting stuff. And there are the sort of renders and drawings, and there's the real thing, sitting at the Cape. And that's what it was meant to look like years ago. And there's another more recent picture, and there's the real thing, sitting on a pad. There's the arm up against the Crew Dragon. Just looks fabulous from there. He sets a new standard in fashion, space fashion. Certainly nothing like the Boeing launch system on pad 40.
Go back one slide. Just have a look at the flame trench to the right hand side. There's like an island sort of thing in the middle of it. That must be for their strong back that goes down.
That's exactly right. And you can see the support system right there.
It's flooded.
Okay, moving on. Now we go to SpaceX. This was the big news over the last couple of months. On the left-hand side, we have the amazing Saturn V, and on the right-hand side, we have what's called the Starship, and this is now called the Super Heavy. And it used to be called the BFR, which was the Big Falcon rocket. And it was always hosted. I'm saying it's Falcon. I'm saying it's Falcon, but it was always interesting because you could never differentiate between the top bit and the bottom bit. Now you can. And this is, of course, the Falcon 9. So it is a very big monster. Sorry for the graphic. All of a sudden, something new pops up. It's called the Starship Hopper. We'll talk about that in a sec. And there is the Starship. There's the Super Heavy. And that's when they're stacked together. That's going to be something to see, let me tell you. There they are. The most amazing part of all this was it's now stainless steel. So you remember all that $5 billion or whatever they bought for composite fibre? Well, guess what? They're not going to use it for this particular rocket. They'll probably use it for the Falcon 9s and the Falcon Heavies. So this is an amazing thing. This is made of stainless steel. And when he spoke about being counterintuitive, some of the details, if you look into it, you'll find why. The heat shield on this thing will be the steel. It's much more adaptable to heat, but he's now using what's called a regenerative heat shield system. Essentially, he's got 2 layers of stainless steel, and he pumps either water or methane fuel at the bottom to dissipate heat. In fact, the bottom layer actually has holes in it, and it actually spurts out the fuel or the water, creating a little layer between the plasma and the rocket ship itself. Pretty amazing technology. I'm going to be fascinated to see how he does this, but that's what he's working on. Oh, God, geez, there's some things from the past. Oh, amazingly similar. Well, out in a little place in Texas, not far from the border, Boca Chica, there might be a wall somewhere between this launch site and the Texas border, which is right on the property. But we don't know yet, nothing started, but all of a sudden this thing started to appear, and there was all sorts of speculation. The contract to build this thing was given to a water tank manufacturer. Now, you know, clearly he's trying to save a few dollars, but we thought it was just an elaborate fuel, water tank. Anyway, so he builds this bottom bit, and he builds this nose cone. And there's the bottom bit, he fills in the fins. It's all stainless steel. And he puts these dummy Raptor engines on the bottom. He did this for a reason. I'll show you in a minute. And there you have it. And so over the last month and a bit, he's built this thing. There it is. Now the launch site is back here, I believe, and this is where they built this thing. There's the top of the first stage, because that's empty basically. Sorry, that fits on that. This is a render of what it looks like. Nice stainless bullet. And this is what the real thing looks like. And that is a real picture. That's not a render. That was a photo opportunity. By the way, in the meanwhile, he's been raising money for SpaceX, okay? I think he raised another $600 million.
Can I read somebody that TikTok or something?
Yeah, I'll get to that. So there you have the render and the real report. And there it is, about a week and a half back, a big wind came along and basically knocked the top off and flew it onto the ground. They reckon, oh, we'll recover from this, we'll just sort of bend it a little bit. And now this thing here is 9 metres wide, right? It's not a small piece of metal. I suspect what will happen is they'll rebuild it. But it doesn't carry anything inside. All the operative components are there. I've now started to believe that this thing is really going to fly. I find it hard to believe, but it probably will fly. There's the bent up piece of metal. And there it is. This is a recent shot, and as you can see, they're putting it all back together again, but they're working underneath. See, this is a hoist, and they've put the dome to the fuel tank up the top, and inside, God knows what they're putting in there, but this is meant to fly.
You're right, it's a water tank. You're absolutely right.
I thought this morning was I'm still not 100% convinced they'll fly this thing, but the Raptor engines are ready to go. They're being manufactured at their manufacturing plant. I think, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, are they building these still in Hawthorne?
Yeah.
And
they're modified, you know that they're modified.
They're modified. They're actually a compromise between a vacuum engine, which has a really big bell, and a atmospheric one, which has a smaller throat. So again, more amazing technology from SpaceX. They've also been upgraded quite significantly from the old Raptor engines. I think they produce something like 2,000 kilonewton of force, but the best engines still to date are the RD-180s, which the Atlas still fly. I think they produce about 2.3 kilonewtons or something of that order. But these are still pretty amazing engines. And this is a rendition of what it might look when it actually launches. And they will repeat the grasshopper effort that they did before they got the Falcon 9s to land. Amazing technology. He's doing it on a shoestring. To build it out in the paddock with a water tank manufacturer is just mind-boggling. The aerospace companies will be just churning in there. Again, this guy's laid down the gauntlet. I don't know if I get to Europe, but Europe is in all sorts of panic about what SpaceX has done to its business. The Europeans are now strategizing as how do we compete with these guys. Just recently they lowered their costs to compete with SpaceX. The Russians have been blown out of the water by SpaceX. So we have this constant debate, Len and myself, but I still believe that he has changed the industry and he's really making a difference.
You're a believer.
I'm a believer.
But the biggest launches of the last couple of years was China.
Correct. And who was the second biggest launcher?
India?
No, SpaceX. 21 launches. Just one thing that we should be aware of, though. This guy, SpaceX, is really sticking his neck out. Whether he's got the funds to develop this thing, there's talk of something like $10 billion to develop this thing. It doesn't come easy, and I don't even think Elon Musk it would come easy. So there's that risk that things can go wrong, even at this point.
Plus they've just announced a 10% headcount reduction.
Correct. Correct. I think I might have mentioned it here. I might not have, but they have. They've taken 10%, and a lot of those 10%. If you read
headcount.
No, headcounts. If you read the tea leaves, I suspect it's the guys that were working with the carbon fibre material. A lot of those people would have no real work now because of it's all one status.
The last time a stainless steel was used in a rocket was Mercury Atlas.
Correct. But this is a different animal. This is thicker material. All sorts of stuff.
Did that over 50 years
I'm not
ago.
going to play this video.
New technology.
I think I might have played it. Lunar exploration. Well, there's the big shaker and mover over the last couple of months. It's all starting to happen. NASA announced the selection of 9 companies eligible for future contracts to transport payloads to the moon. And of course, you've got some of the real heavyweights there, Lockheed Martin. Of course, you've got Marsden, Moon Express, but there's a couple of other, startups that are really getting involved. And the idea here is to basically share some of the money over 10 years. Each company will receive only small amounts of funding to develop payload users guide, and then will be eligible to compete for task orders under the CLPS to fly those payloads. So that's a real interesting development. There's a Lockheed Martin proposal. Again, the idea is that you scale from the small landers up to finally the man-rated landers, and it's an evolutionary process up the ladder.
You should order them from China.
Sorry?
You should order those from China.
Yeah, we should. I'm sure that Andrew will give us a good update as to where the Chinese are. But there's no doubt about it, the Chinese have got a huge ambition on the moon. And Lunar Gateway, still progressing. Of course, lunar tugs. And there was a kind of a Lockheed Martin concept for a lunar lander. Don't know the full weight of this thing, but It just looks big and expensive. Coming from Lockheed Martin, it would be.
Is that steel?
Space launch systems, things have been moving. As you know, at the early next year, it was meant to be this year, early next year we'll see the first mission, Exploration Mission 1, and it will fly to the moon. And they're now getting themselves organised. There it is, the Orion capsule. That's inside. It's quite a large space actually. You know, it is a lot bigger than the Apollo. It's about a 5 metre diameter.
These guys giants?
No, he's not that big. What they did do is they got the hydrogen tank for the space launch system, took it out of New Orleans, the chute, and they put it up at Marshall Space Flight Centre, and they're going to shake the living daylights out of it and make sure it can survive the loads. And there it is. They also did some more launch abort tests. That's the motors there. They're smart abort systems. They're not, you know, your granddad's abort systems from the Apollo era. Oops, go back. And there they are testing it. That was the actual test, and it's meant to basically pull the Orion off an exploding or something else unforeseen happening to the SLS. And it does hoops in the air and does all sorts of things and vectors its way around. And, they did do a test in 2010. It's worth having a look at that. You'll see some of the film of that particular program sequence of events. And of course, test stand B2, that should say, at Centre Space Centre is just about getting ready to put something in there and fire it. And what it will be the core, the SLS, with its oxygen hydrogen tanks put together, and the 4 RS-25 space shuttle engines on the bottom. Real space shuttle engines, by the way, and they will just fall into the ocean. Anyway, there's that thing going back maybe 50 years ago. It was also used to test the Saturn V. So there's a bit of a back in history shock. Of course, the service module has come from Europe, from Bremen in Germany, and this is it recently. And this is the Exploration Mission 1 profile. It's a great little shot, but it'll tell you, you know, it'll get itself into a weird kind of orbit, and then it'll fire its rockets and come back. Be great. Planetary. I'll run very quickly through this. Hubble. I don't know if you know, the wide field camera had broken down recently. It's now been repaired. Engineers there reckon this thing could go into the well into the 20s. That's why the wide field is so important. Pictures like that go right back to the sun.
More than 90% of those objects are galaxies, not stars. There are very few stars in that.
Correct. And they go back to just about not far from the Big Bang itself. I find it absolutely mind-boggling when I see that picture. We had Chandra, gyros. They were having similar problems with Hubble. That's now fixed. We encountered the Sun with the Parker Solar Probe, and of course...
just go back to the Parker one.
Yep.
Apparently in December it's going to set a new record. A new speed record, December of this year.
Yeah. I believe so.
It's going to be doing something like over 200 kilometres per second.
It is the fastest. I heard it will go up to 800 kilometres an hour, or some ridiculous number.
No, that's not a ridiculous number, that's an aeroplane.
Sorry, 800,000 kilometres an hour.
Yeah, possibly.
And so this is still, it's going to break a few records yet.
It's far faster than any of the voyages on your horizon. It has a lot less total energy because it's closer to the sun.
Amazing. Great mission. Of course, we know InSight landed on Mars. Fantastic. In good health, doing well. This is in the video, but I won't play that again. And there's one of the first released pictures looking out on the planes. And Andrew will talk a bit more. Selfie, one of the first selfies they always do. And this is a sort of a render showing the seismometer and the, what do they call it, the heat, Andrew? Heat flow probe. That's what it kind of looks like. And I don't think that's quite as close as that. And there it is. It actually got the seismometer on here. And
must be rain. Dusty.
I'd like to play this, but we're probably going to run out of time. Sounds of Mars. It's actually quite intriguing because it was actually the wind blowing past the solar panels, and it's at a very low frequency, so they had to double the octaves. But you can actually hear the vibration on Mars with the wind, and it's quite fascinating thing to watch. Or to hear.
You were Space Nerd.
Hey?
You were Space Nerd.
Pretty much. Pretty much. What's this one? Just confirmation of the old analysis, and this is probably old news now, but old Indian data says the moon's full of ice. Brilliant. Go and find it. I think that's what the Chinese are looking for. Unfortunately, no signals yet. They've got another plan to try to. I think they're up to Plan D at the moment.
They're sending a new software load up to it, but they're not optimistic. This is opportunity. Opportunities probably.
Opportunity on opportunity. So we hope to hear it, but I got the funny feeling it's a dead duck. Poppy phone. Kepler, this died. Soviet Dawn mission, ran out of fuel, did great science. Andrew sort of spoke about a few of these. Of course, we've got OSIRIS-REx around the asteroid Bennu. It detected water on the asteroid, and it will look at collecting samples next year and return to Earth in 2023. And there it is. Just another rock.
But that would be the most significant recovery in history.
If it happens.
We've had others. We've had others. We've had comet recovery, and don't know about asteroid. Have we had an asteroid recovery, Andrew?
AOS-1.
Yeah, I didn't get much. And landed in Australia, didn't it?
Yeah.
Something like that. Oops, sorry, go back. This is New Horizons, and this is some models that they did when they had early pictures of it. And there is a picture that is about a week and a half, 2 weeks, 3 weeks old. Andrew hopefully will show us some better ones. But you can see the kind of movement. And that's what it looks like. So it ain't small. You think it is, but it ain't.
Just on that, Dr. Alan Stern said, as you said, there's enough fuel to go to the 2030s. They're going to look for another object.
Yes, they are.
They're not ruling out another encounter.
Correct. They're sourcing another object.
They're also planning an Earth photo as well. Furthest ever taken.
Look forward to that. But
it's a risk. It's a risk in realigning the telescope. They may lose.
Yeah. Hopefully, we might. They should send it to Planet X. What do you reckon?
Well, they haven't found it.
Yeah, you got the address smart.
Just follow those planets. Yeah. A, B, C. All right.
Thank you, Dodgers.
The next space telescope. That's if James Webb doesn't suck up any funding. They're talking about something bigger and better, and they're talking about biosignatures from possible habitable planets. And I find that again just amazing to be able to do that. And that telescope could be up in the next 15, 20 years. So I know it's a long time, but time flies. There it is, Le Voir. And of course we've got the Mars 2020 coming up, and they've picked a crater and will case samples for later sample return. So that's again going to be a great mission. It's got a little helicopter on it, by the way. Got a little drone, so it'll be fun. Voyager 2 finally went past the heliopause. Voyager 1 passed it in 2012. It's now indefinite interstellar space, and they reckon it could operate for another decade, which is
what they're talking about is they're monitoring power loads on those, and they said that around about 2020, they're going to have to start cycling the instruments to share the power.
Load shed, yep.
Yeah, load sharing, or load shedding. But they can talk to the Victorians about that.
Yeah.
And it'll probably run to about 2030 or something.
That's a lousy picture, but essentially it's where the atmosphere of the sun kind of ends and the interstellar pressure, it's where they're equal at the boundary.
Voyager 2 is currently transmitting at 160 bits per second.
Good old
Like not kilobits, bits.
So good old days. I remember when the internet first started, we had modems that
160
weren't as good as that. God knows where I am here. The recent news is, you know, the Air Force gave money to 3 companies, Blue Origin, Northrop Grumman and United, to build the next generation of Air Force lifters. But
Blue Origins may have a problem. It's called divorce.
I'll come to that. But what's half of 140 billion?
Yeah.
70.
Yeah, but his fortune just halved.
Irrespective, 70 billion is a lot of money. The latest information is the Air Force says it needs more time before it's willing to launch payloads on the previously flown Falcon 9 rockets. The Falcon 9 recently launched the 3rd time. Okay, they've had a 3-time launcher, but it's amazing to me the Air Force is even contemplating it. So they are seriously thinking about it. There's the Blue Origin nuclear, and there is the orbital ATK. It's now Grumman. I forgot the extension. And of course the ULA Vulcan. So they're the 3 launches, there they are. And then we had the NROL 71 launch, and you know, I love seeing some of these pictures and the burnt boosters. The launch is crazy. You know, they ignite the hydrogen, and you think the whole thing's going to blow up, but it doesn't. There it is. And it was launched from Vandenberg. European Space Agency. The only really, they've selected launch site for EXO 2020, Mars. What's this? Arian Space has currently a dozen launches in 2019, so they're only talking 12. This year, or last year, SpaceX had 21. China had 35 or 36, I think, something like that. European Space Agency officials warned of a challenging year. Arian Space is cutting its price. 3 European companies have won a study for lunar lander missions. Remember, the lunar village concept came from ESA to begin with, so they're very keen to get onto it. And will be led by Arian Space Group along with PTS scientists. They're an ex-lunar X-Prize competitor. And the study will examine the feasibility of lunar lander mission launching in 2025 to mine lunar regolith to extract resources like oxygen. They're serious about trying to get fuel off the moon. And there's the old X-Prize PT scientists. That's pretty much where I got to with my... In fact, this is where I ended, so I'm only 2 minutes later than that. I didn't update where we are in Russia, but as I said before, it's in turmoil. Next month we'll continue on. Thank you.
Right, so Andrew Rennie with his Planetary and Space Science update. Let's talk about our presentation. Do we get right?
Good, thanks very much, folks. Now, I had intended to not only do an update on what's happened in the 2 months since our last meeting, but also give you a preview of what's happening in 2019 and going to 2020. But, like Angelo, got too much, so we'll do the future one perhaps next month. Now, I'm going to start with a few little movies, because movies usually fall off the end of my little show. So I've got about 8-9 minutes of video. So, Michael, you going to do the honors for me, please? Mm-hmm. Good. It's down under presentation. Good one. And videos. Open that folder. and we show them 1, 2, 3 in that order.
Don't pronounce him tonight.
Alright. Finally. Now, for those of you who can't speak Chinese, oh, okay. Doesn't know how to do videos. That's new. They're just MP4 movies.
Just drop it onto a VLC player.
Okay, go on. Open the VLC.
Have we got a VLP player?
Yeah, they're one down next to Chrome.
Yeah. Oh, there it is, VLC. Ah.
This image was sent by the probe Chang'e 4. The Chang'e probe? The probe called Chang'e 4.
China's Chang'e 4 probe has entered in the planned orbit.
It's Chang'e 4. Chang'e.
So it's not Chang'e. It's Chang'e. Okay. Right. Anyway, let's go on to movie number 2, which is the landing on the moon, on the lunar far side.
It is black and white.
And this is running at 10 frames per second. So to speed it up. So it's been shown at 24, 25 frames a second, but it's filmed at 10 frames a second. So this is faster. There is a slower version that's been people put into the real speed, but it takes you long to show. Anyway, the thing is, okay, it's in orbit, going horizontally. They fire the engines, as you can see. There's a landing leg at the top over there. And this is part of the structure of the spacecraft. And at the moment we're thrusting to kill out our horizontal velocity. In a moment, having reached not quite stationary but nearly stationary horizontally, here we go, we now tip over and begin thrusting to slow our vertical fall. So we're going to fall, not quite vertically, but if you watch where these craters are moving, we're almost coming down vertically. Now the reason they did that rather than the traditional Apollo type landing or the one they did with Chang'e 3 is to get over the mountains surrounding the South Pole Aitken Basin. Very nice control.
I wonder where I'll park.
Now watch for the dust being kicked up as we get near the touchdown. We're hovering there at about 100 metres altitude, searches out the landing site, and then goes for it. Now the reason I had to search out the landing site to make sure there aren't any big craters. Here we go, touchdown, and so notice the pad on the left there. Most of the pictures you see are actually rotated around, as I'll show you one shortly. The motor keeps on outgassing for a while. The motor switches off on before touchdown. It drops down from about 3 metres in 1/6 gravity, a fairly gentle touchdown, but then the motor continues to outgas for a while, which accounted for the dust continuing to spread out. Notice that the lunar soil, okay, that's it. Thank you. Okay, come to the next video, and we've got the vehicle moving out onto the lunar surface. This is U2, Y-U-T-U, is U2, and number 2. They had a naming competition to name the second rover, and they decided after all the names that were submitted, they'd go with U2. Note the way the wheels operate and turn it.
Have they sped this up as well? Have they sped this up as well? Time lapse?
Stand still.
And it turns around and takes a photograph of the thing. The actual photographing each other was shown live on China television, and you can find that on the internet. Okay. Now, Hayabusa. This shows. You're supposed to see the spacecraft moving.
Where's the spacecraft? The red one.
Anyway, it does on a version another version I had. What happened was Ryugu went behind the sun as seen from the Earth. As a result, they couldn't communicate with Hayabusa 2 for several weeks. And so, rather than hold it at 20 kilometers, see the -20 there, where the red dot is? Red dot is Hayabusa, the black dot is Ryugu. And they simply said, okay, we can't hold it there while we go behind the moon, because we just got no control over it. So what they did is they said, okay, we'll send it out on a trajectory out to about 110 kilometers, and it will come and drift back in. And by the time it gets back in, it's come out the other side of the sun. And they get control of it again. One of the advantages of going behind the sun is they've got a better handle on the exact orbit of Ryugu. As a result of that, they are now more able to confidently control Hayabusa in station keeping with Ryugu, because now they've got a better idea of the orbit. So the navigation is made easier by this event. Okay, next movie. And here is Bennu. Now, Angelo showed you a still of that, and here it is. Notice the big rock sitting on the surface. Ryugu has two big rocks sitting on its surface. So the Japanese chose the asteroid with two big rocks. Good. And our last one. As Angelo said, the landing site for Mars rover 2020
was produced from NASA images taken from orbit.
It's been chosen. We're going to go on a little fly around.
Over will likely land. The arcing hills in the center, 1,600 feet high, are the rim of the crater.
The central goal of Mars 2020 is to learn whether life ever existed on Mars. It's too cold and dry for life to exist on the Martian surface today. But after Jezero crater formed billions of years ago, water filled it to form a deep lake, about the same size as Lake Tahoe. Eventually, as Mars climate changed, Lake Jezero dried up and surface water disappeared from the planet. An ancient lake is a fantastic place to pursue our goal of looking for possible Martian life. On Earth, lakes are filled with living creatures. Evidence of that life is often preserved in the mud and sand deposited on the bottom of the lake. So, we use the rover's instruments to explore the rocks of the ancient lake bed. Here we can see evidence of the former lake. The canyon cutting through the crater rim was carved by a river. As the water entered the lake, it slowed and dropped the sand and mud it was carrying to form the fan-shaped delta. The white line is a path the rover might follow in its first 2 years, called the prime mission. During this period, we use the rover science instruments to analyze the lake sediments. After we explore the delta, we hope to investigate the shoreline of the former lake. To get there, we have to traverse around a sea of modern sand dunes. From this perspective, you can see former shorelines curving around a headland. We can picture waves in Lake Jezero beating on a sandy beach. And finally, we will press on to the crater rim. Jezero Crater formed when a large object collided with Mars, excavating rocks from deep in the Martian crust, exposing them in the rim for us to study. These rocks would have been hot shortly after the impact and may have hosted hot springs. Deposits from these springs would be another target in our search for possible ancient life on Mars.
So that sums up why they chose Jezero as the landing site. If you're interested, some of the recent conferences they've had in the United States, the people have explained more about the landing site selection and how they did that. Right, Angelo, Michael, sorry, we're on to the slides now. And can you take all those into the slideshow? If you want, you can move our shoot a video folder out of the way.
Yeah.
Control?
No, control. Go shoot. Keep going. All that and go shoot. Click the last one.
Anyway, I'm going to start with New Horizons. And this photo I'm going to show you was taken from 6,700 kilometres away on January the 1st at 5:26 Universal Time. It has a resolution on the surface of 135 metres, and the pits that you see in it are...
It'll go in order. Well, actually, one of them will go in order.
Yeah, they should. They're all numbered. One from 0 to 1, 0, 0.
It's not putting in order.
If you just open that one, it should then go into...
Well, I'll show them in random order then, and I'll just talk zigzags through the presentation.
You'll just have some extras.
You want me to just click it again?
Yeah, click on it, open it, and you should have a forward button.
Yeah, I know, but the problem is when you open it, it comes up with the wrong slide to start with, so.
Just open the first one.
Yeah, that's a picture of Venus taken by the Akatsuki space probe. That's a picture of Mars taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter showing the Opportunity rover on the surface of Mars after the dust storm. No,
we're not sorted in order.
Oh well. Okay.
Should be able to open just the first one and then use the mouse wheel to scroll through them.
Yeah, should be. Sure. Right, let's try that.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah.
On Windows computers, you usually just select the first picture and then press next.
Now you've got the arrow. Okay, here we go.
Here we go. Right.
Is that in order now?
Good one. Right.
All right.
So these pits that you see, especially the big one, by the way, officially, it's the smaller lobe and the larger lobe. But I go with Alan Stern. Ultima and Tuba. Okay. So on Ultima, there's a big depression. What's not certain is whether that's an impact crater or whether it's a collapse from the venting of the primordial material from which it was made. Likewise, some of these other indentations that you see there, are they sinkholes or are they impact results? We're waiting until they get a better resolution. By the way, that picture only came out a few days ago, so and notable as well, see the white around the neck? It's not a necklace. They're debating what that is. I think it's because material has slumped into that place and it's simply a finer grained material and therefore looks brighter than the other. But the jury is out.
Could be a thermal thing.
Yes, could be. But this is visible light image, it's not an...
Yeah, that's maybe there might be some thermal characteristics by being.
Yeah. What's the white in between?
That's what we're talking about.
Sorry, I missed that.
We don't know.
You don't know? I don't know.
We're speculating.
Around the neck. Yeah, around the neck.
Yeah. what did you say?
The official version so far that's been released publicly is we don't know what it is. I just offered the explanation, possible explanation, that it's finely grained material that is settled around that neck due to gravitational reasons, and being finer than the rest of the regolith, it's brighter.
Could be ice.
Could be.
Anyway.
So, you can offer a whole lot of reasons, and I'm not the expert on.
It's glue. It's glue.
So anyway, there's Ultima Thule. Right, next picture please. Now, where is New Horizons? Well, you can see the box there showing, and around it you can see a number of other climate-guided objects. And many of these are being imaged, albeit as just a pixel. But from that imaging, with just even one pixel, they can work out things like its rotation rate, its brightness, and more particularly, just exactly where it is in relation to New Horizons spacecraft. So they can actually work out quite a bit from even just a pixel. By watching it over a period of time, you can see it does it vary in brightness as it rotates and so on. Whether or not it'll get a closer flyby of any of these is still to be determined. Alan Stern hopes they will, but we'll have to wait and see. Okay, next picture please. Now, the moon. One of the great puzzles of the moon is why is the near side different from the far side? Now, maybe it would help if I use my little
top one, very top.
Waiter.
Very top. That's eerie.
Now, this area here, this is opposite the far side, and this is the Sea of Moscow, which is the main sea, I'll call it a sea, on the far side. But this darker area here is the South Pole South Pole Aitken Basin. The reason that is because from the South Pole to a crater up here called Aitken. Right, next picture please. And here's the South Pole, and there's Aitken there, and you see this huge depression. Now, the X mark is the exact spot where Chang'e 4 landed. It actually landed in there, in that crater there. Okay, next one. So here's this crater. It's recognisable because it's sort of got a heart shape to it, and the lander landed in that crater there. Okay, next one. It was in a lunar orbit, polar orbit, and landed. I think it was going from north to south when it landed. Okay, next one. So here's our little schematic showing the trajectory of the whole thing. Note the Quequayo relay satellite out here, relaying instructions to do the landing and also monitoring the video back to mission control in Beijing. Okay, next one. And here's the relay satellite on the moon, and vice versa. It's in an halo orbit around the L2 position, the lunar L2 position. If it was exactly at L2, of course, it would be in a direct line. You wouldn't be able to see the Earth. So it's in a halo orbit around that position. Next one. It carried two Saudi Arabian microsatellites, or miniature satellites, and one of them failed. It was detached to go into orbit, and it failed. But the other one worked quite nicely, thank you very much. And this is an example which brings to mind the Apollo 8 moonrise photo. Earthrise, sorry. Yeah, photo. And nice picture here of the Earth and the Moon, taken by that Saudi Arabian satellite. Okay, next one. And I noted already that the descent was pretty much vertical. Go next. And here's where it landed, there, approximately, 200 metre scale there. And these are some of the other craters that are visible in the landed photos. Okay, next. And again, these are from people working out. The background image is a lunar reconnaissance orbiter photo taken in 2010. This is from the Chung 4 camera, descent camera, and it's pointing out things that are visible in it, and so you can work out that must have gone. Okay, next one. This is how these photos are usually displayed. Notice in the movie, this was up over there, but you see the dirt that's been displaced. Not much displacement. You'll see that again in a photo or two's time. Next one. Again, trying to work out where it landed. This crater here, which is commented, this is taken before the rover was deployed, and that's that crater there. And we zoom to there, and we zoom to there, and zoom to there, and zoom to the landing. So that's sort of figuring out where it is. Next one. It took a panorama. Now that actually enlarges up to huge size, but we'll just leave it like that. And so if you can get that, if you haven't already seen that picture, download it in full resolution, and you can zoom in and look at all the details around there. Okay, next one. So it came down off the, this is a hoist. So it was up on the rover deck there. This rode it down to the hoist then lowered it down, and it went down the ramp. And it moved initially out to there. You saw the video of it doing the turn there. And then it sat there for several days because it was then getting on towards noon, lunar noon at the landing site, and it was getting a bit hot. So they decided to play it safe, and rather than risk getting overheated and so on, they simply shut down. And that's why we saw nothing for about 2 weeks, or more than a week after the landing. Nothing more about it. And then it moved on. And then when it got out past here, it came to lunar night. And it's now in the lunar night, 14 days of lunar night. And of course it shut down for that time. It has a radioactive source on board. It's not an RTG, radioisotope thermoelectric generator. It's just simply radioactive material which makes it hot or warm. And it keeps the thing warm. Now the Russians did the same thing with the Lunicon rovers. They kept them warm overnight so that they could keep operating. And those rovers operated for a year or more on the lunar surface. Well, I hope you do the same with this one, and it's hopefully survived the night. We'll find out in a few days' time whether it survived or not. Next picture, please. Now there's a little rover on the surface at that point where it did the little turn, and that's the point at which it took the photographs looking back. And this is when the Chinese leaders were at mission control, and they made great feel-good speeches about how wonderful the Chinese space program was and how great communism is. And they did this in live. They sent the commands to the relay satellite, which sent it down to the rover. The rovers then took the pictures. They were then sent back to the relay satellite and down to mission control, and then processed in real time, in almost real time. And after about 10, 15 minutes or so, there the pictures were displayed on mission control to enormous applause. So they did this on live TV. Okay, next one. And that's the picture that the rover took of the landing. That's the landing legs haven't sunk in very much, just like the Apollo lunar modules. So the regolith there is pretty firm. And that's where the rover track heads off, and it did a little turn there. And then it just came back around, and it's taken the photo back this way. Okay, next one. And that's another view of the panorama. Next one. In that little container, there's a little non-environmentally friendly drinking cup for size comparison. That's a little bio lab, a little habitat, in which they had seeds and they had animals and so on to see if they could live. Well, this one, there is the germinating cotton seeds they were. Cotton seeds germinated, and there was another picture that's published which showed one half of this and the other half showed great big lush luxuriant growth. And they got mixed up with the captions. And they were published with the luxuriant growth one saying they were the ones that grown on the moon. But they were controlled, done in a laboratory in China. Okay? I can assure you that's the date, because these ones which haven't grown so well are the ones on the moon. Their lighting is sunlight, but not direct sunlight, because that would be too bright and would kill the plants. So it's diffuse sunlight going in, and they've got a camera on board that obviously takes photos inside that can and then radioed it back to Earth. Unfortunately, now that and this is on the lander, not the rover. Now that the night time has come, the lander of course cooled down, froze, and all this is dead now because it's so cold. So after when the sun comes up again, this experiment is done and finished with. Right, this one. And if you want to do this little Jade Rabbit journal that shows you what's been going on, you can follow the mission with that. This one. And going now to Hayabusa and the Ryugu. Last year we talked about the landers, and this they've now had a rather belatedly, I thought. They had a naming competition and they chose names for the two little rovers, the Minerva rovers. So why they didn't do it beforehand, I don't know. But anyway, okay, this one. Now this is a gravitational map of Ryugu, and just reminding you that gravity on the Earth is 9.8 if you want to be exact, but 10 meters per second squared, or if you like, 10 newtons per kilogram. If you hold a kilogram, like a kilogram buffalo milk, then you're 10 kilograms. Say 1 kilogram weighs 10 newtons on Earth. Well, 1 kilogram on the heavy on the poles would be 0.14 of a millinewton. So, it's not much gravity there. Because it's spinning, of course, this is perceived gravity, not the actual gravitational field. This is perceived gravity. Because it's rotating, you get flung off TNC, and so the gravity there is a lot weaker. So if you want to jump off this asteroid, the equator is the place to do it. Right, next one. They've named the features on the asteroid after characters that appear in children's stories. You notice the one that you'll recognise, Alice's Wonderland. You're probably not so familiar with some of the other Asian type children's stories. Okay, next one. And this shows where they are in relation to some of those things. Okay, next one.
I'm just going to see the better reach 10 o'clock, so.
Okay, right, we're just happening. The children, they had art competitions for this thing. This is by lots of arts, next picture. This is one of my favourites here. I haven't got time to detail the things. I noticed the lady coming down on the song. Okay, this one. And again, if you're Japanese, you can follow the mission in storybooks and things like that. Next picture. Here we are. This is the lander inside, putting that seismometer down on the surface. One of the lens caps either didn't come off or it's dirty because that seems to be permanent state of affairs. Next picture shows the seismometer being placed on the ground, So that's the wind cover being put over, windshield being put over the seismometer. Okay, next one. Mars 2020, okay, go on, we've talked about that already. Now, there's some other missions in orbit around Mars, and this is the 2001 Mars Odyssey, named after, of course, the film. And that's the picture just released a day or two ago, one of the latest pictures, and there's thousands of these pictures it's taken of Mars. Next one. Now to Jupiter and the Juno mission. Okay, next. And there's the dolphin, a nice, better picture of the dolphin than we've had before. There's the dolphin there. Next one. And next one. Juno's not supposed to look at the moons, but it has taken a distant look at Io, and there's a volcanic eruption there on Io. Next one. Again, this has inspired lots and lots of artists, not only just in the photographic fields, but also in oils and paints. And this lady here has done this painting. Next one shows the painting itself. So lots of artwork has been inspired by the Juno mission. Next one. Now Venus. Let's get the name right again. It's the Akatsuki mission, which has been in orbit around Venus for several years now. It initially failed to go into orbit and had to do another loop around the sun and come back. So we've got some ultraviolet pictures. Next one. Quite remarkable detail now emerging of the cloud structures and so on that mission. Next one. Now some infrared pictures. Again. Oops. I'm pressing this.
Yeah, you'll do it.
Oh.
You can do it.
Okay. All right. What I was going to show is that this is see there's a boundary in the cloud layers there, another one down here. So this mission hardly ever mentioned in any of the literature. It's done these amazing work at Venus. So your picture, probably the Mariner 10 picture of Venus is probably the one that you have in your mind. Going to Mars, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. A few days ago they released this picture of a new impact crater on Mars. It's on the polar region. And as you said, that little dot there is, there it is there, that's Opportunity after the dust storm. Unfortunately, Opportunity, no contact yet. They've had 600 attempts to contact it. And lastly, there's going to be a performance by this group called Ephemera, and they're in Sydney, and they do space-based music. Kana Wilkins, that's her there. She's in charge of this group, and she's a good friend of the Space Show because she's given us 4 CDs, and we played them on the show, not all of them, but some of them, and she's done an interview as well. So they're performing in Sydney in a few days' time. So if you're up in Sydney, you want to check them out. Good group. Chamber music, of course. Some people don't like chamber music. Okay, that's it.
Oh my God. We've broken a record. I think we are 4 minutes late by my watch, and that's fantastic. So listen, that's the conclusion of the meeting now. Thank you everyone for attending tonight, coming out to our new venue. Thank you to all the speakers, Mike and Angelo, and our special guest. I really appreciate the impromptu presentation, and Andrew, of course. Actually down the back running the buttons and wires. Thank you for that. So that's it. Once again, if you could fix up your bill on the way out, that would be much appreciated. And we will see you back here next month. It's the 25th of February, I believe, is the date. 4th Monday of the month. Thanks everyone. Have a great evening. Drive safe. Train safe.